Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Esquivias Jags. I will be the MC for today's activity, and we welcome you to our Legal and Law of Armed Conflict Webinar Series 2021, which is a joint project of the Philippine Military Academy Alumni Association Incorporated, the PMA Foundation for Truth and Justice Incorporated, and the AFP Center for Law of Armed Conflict. So may we call on everyone to please stand for our Philippine national anthem.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiging sa sinananan, alam ng puso sa higit mo'y buhay. Lupang hinihang, kuyagan ang magiting, sa manlulubing, di ka masisigil, sa nagatang tutok sa simulan, sa langit o pagkaw, ay hinatang tulang, awit sa pagkayang minamahal, ang isang ang matawad mo'y tagumpay ka nagiging, ang inuwin at araw niya kailan, ang kanilang-ibigin, lumalang araw ng walang pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo, ang ibigaya ng pantay mag-amin, at mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
To give the welcome remarks, may we call on Brigadier General Joel Alejandro S. Naknak, Philippine Army, Director, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Center for Law of Armed Conflict. Sir.
Mga kagalang-galang na cavaliers and fellow public servants, be it in private as well as in government sector. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. According to Mary Robinson, today's human rights violations are the causes of tomorrow's conflict. Thus, there is a need to advocate and promote human rights principles to everyone to avoid committing violations in order to have a more peaceful and developed community. But before that, I would like to greet, before anything else, I would like to greet and acknowledge some of our key personalities this afternoon. I would like to greet Cavalier Amado T. Espino Jr., Sir, Class 72, the Chairman of the Philippine Military Academy Alumni Association Incorporated. Good afternoon, sir. Of course, we have Cavalier Ferdinand M. Bucobo, Class 74, the President of the PMAAAI Foundation for Truth and Justice Incorporated, or PFTJI. Likewise, good afternoon, sir. We are honored, ladies and gentlemen, to have our guest today, speakers from the Commission on Human Rights, in the person of Atty Jacqueline Ann Deguia. Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon. And of course, Attorney Francis Tom Temprosa. And of course, I would like also to greet the officers and members of the PMAAAI Foundation for Truth and Justice Incorporated. Likewise, fellow Cavaliers and other participants now here present, we have, I see 119 of us, plus the 7 panelists around. Kinagagalak ko pong batiin kayo ng napakagandang hapon. So, let me tell you that the PMAAAI Foundation for Truth and Justice was organized way back in 2004 to support the objectives of the PMAAAI in providing legal assistance and services to members who are facing criminal, civil or administrative charges before any court, administrative body, or any other tribunal for acts done in connection with or arising from the lawful performance of official duty, and who are victims of injustice. The help provided is by giving funds, material aid, and any kind technical assistance or organizational support and other suitable forms of assistance, such as legal education. That is what our objective today. Through a series of discussions then with the PMAAAI Foundation for Truth and Justice, both parties conceptualized a joint project and came up with a calendar of activities for this year, one of which is the conduct of series of webinar trainings and information drive for all PMAAAI members. This led to this webinar series, which we are starting today, entitled Legal and Law of Armed Conflict Webinar Series 2021. It aims to educate, promote, and update participants on the areas of human rights, the discipline of international humanitarian law, and the current controversial anti-terrorism law. Today, our webinar focuses on human rights and the uniformed services, as well as the CHR and its current programs. Our speakers, Atty Francis Tom Temprosa, Director 4 of the Chief of the Human Rights Education and Promotion Office of the Commission on Human Rights, will talk about the first topic, human rights and its implications to the uniformed services. And of course, Atty Jacqueline Ann Deguia, the Executive Director and Spokesperson of the Commission, who will talk about or introduce to us better about the Commission on Human Rights and its current programs. For the next webinars, we have set 8 June for, we will invite subject matter experts and discuss to us about international humanitarian law, and also known as the law of armed conflict, or we have also our local law here, the RA 9851. And the third webinar series or schedule will be on 22 June. and we will discuss the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 and its salient provisions or some issues related to it. Now, for those who will be finishing all the webinars, please be informed that a certificate of completion will be awarded to you. And I guess this will be honored by the CHR when you will be applying for your respective clearances later on. So without so much ado, ladies and gentlemen, it is my esteemed honor and privilege that in behalf of the PFTJI and the Truth and Justice Foundation, we welcome you all in today's activity. I hope that each participant will capture the details of the presentations or discussions and impart to your community or your organization the true principles that is shared to us. Thank you and good day.
Thank you very much, Brigadier General Joel Alejandro S. Naknak, Philippine Army. Now we will proceed with the introduction of the speaker and the topic for today's webinar. But first, we have to state our house rules for today's activity. First, please listen attentively to the speakers. Second, please type your questions in the Q&A function provided here, and your question will be entertained during the open forum. And third and last one, let us enjoy listening to the webinar and let's learn from our guest speakers. And we have a bonus for today's webinar because we will have a raffle later on after the open forum. Now, for for today's webinar, we invited two top caliber speakers to discuss first, human rights in the uniformed services, and second, the CHR and its current programs. What better subject matter experts on human rights than from the Commission on Human Rights itself? The AFP, through the AFP Center for Law of Armed Conflict, has been in constant coordination with the CHR with respect to advocacy, education, and training for the promotion of and adherence to human rights and international humanitarian law. We engage the different CHR divisions, including the commissioners,
Nawala ka.
how best we are of you. Hello? Uh, hello, sir? Narinig na po ako? Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sir? Narinig po ako, sir?
Readable pero minsan nag-garble.
Hello?
Okay, please continue.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Director Temprosa is an adjunct professor of law at the Ateneo de Manila University Law School and a lecturer at the Far Eastern University Institute of Law in the Philippines. He had been the legal advisor of the CHR and was designated as his legal counsel before the Supreme Court of the Philippines. In the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Office in the Philippines, Atty. Temprosa served in different capacities from 2009 to 2013, and he dealt with legal issues of refugee protection, statelessness, and internal displacement. After working with the UNHCR, he worked in other branches of the Philippine government, such as the Director for Legislation at the Office of the Majority Leader in the Senate, where he was involved with several parliamentary and law reform initiatives, and as an attorney at the Commission of Elections. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome and call on our distinguished lecturer, Attorney Francis Tom Temprosa. Let us give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Colonel Eduardo Espivias. May I please be given the permission to share my screen? Good afternoon to everyone. Okay. Is it all right if I share my screen? Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay. So first of all, I just want to greet all of you who are joining us this afternoon. Um, I would like to thank the PMA Alumni Association Incorporated for the invitation, as well as the PMA Alumni Association Incorporated, Foundation for Truth and Justice Incorporated, and of course our friends from the Armed Forces of the Philippines Center for the Law of Armed Conflict. Of course, I would like to also very much greet all of you are here joining us. The chairman of the PMA Alumni Association Incorporated, Cavalier Amado Espino Jr. Hope I got that right. Of course, the chair of the foundation, um, Lieutenant, hope got it right, General Ferdinand Bocobo. And also, of course, I believe we're also joined by the director of the PMA Alumni Association, executive director rather, uh, Cavalier Domingo Pequiras. Okay. And syempre, thank you very much to our the head the head of the AFP Center for the Law of Armed Conflict, Brigadier General Joel Alejandro Naknak. Thank you so much for having me. Okay. It really is a pleasure to speak to all of you. Our friends here are joining us. I would also like to greet you. Good afternoon. And those in government, the uniform service, and the public, thank you so much for listening in. So I was basically asked to talk about a very important topic that really sort of affects all of us, and most especially those in the military service, in the uniform service, human rights and the uniformed services. This topic is really broad, um, and there are a lot to be said about this. But I will just probably concentrate on 4 points. So I prepared 4 points for your consideration this afternoon. I think that we should, first of all, consider the relationship between human rights and the security sector. Is there a relationship between the two? I think that's a fundamental question that we need to ask and answer. The second one is about, after knowing the relationship, to clarify the basic concepts and principles of human rights. So for those of you who have been part of the PMA, the AFP, and the uniformed service as a whole, I know many of you will really be familiar with this, but we will just go back to them as a refresher. Um, because that's very important for us to answer the third part or the third point, which is about the specific instruments for human rights in the security sector. Um, there are a lot, but I will just concentrate on the salient ones and provide some observations, if you will, those that relate to the military as a topic this afternoon. And then after that, I will provide some observations on the progress, the prospects, and possibilities, what I call the road ahead for all of us, given the human rights and the security sector, that topic broadly. Okay. So the first question that probably will come to mind is there a relationship between human rights and the security sector? I would say that there really is a relationship. Let me begin with a quote from UN Secretary General Kofi Annan in his 2005 report, In Larger Freedom, wherein he said that we will not enjoy development without security, we will not enjoy security without development, and we will not enjoy either without respect for human rights. So this is the relationship between and among those variables: security, human rights, and development. Why? Okay. I want us to begin with reconceiving what security actually is. Um, First of all, we have this notion that security is about freedom from fear. For those of you who are very familiar with this, I know many of you are. Before, we had this notion that security is limited to freedom from fear, the absence of war or armed conflict. However, in the 1940s, in a very famous speech, US President Franklin Roosevelt told us that in the beginning of the modern times, there are more freedoms rather than just freedom from fear. There is the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear, and beyond. What it means is that I think the AFP has this approach also, that we should conceive security as more than traditional security. It is actually about human security or non-traditional security. So the proper referent for security should be at the human level. So with that in mind, we begin now to think that it is definitely much more than the security of the state, or in our case, the Philippines. It's also about the security of the person. What does it mean? It actually means that the notion of human security is not just about your, again, as I said, freedom from armed conflict, freedom from war. And it also means that, according to this definition from the United Nations General Assembly resolution, that the right of people to live in freedom and dignity, free from poverty and despair, that is human security. All individuals are entitled to freedom from fear and freedom from want. So it incorporates sort of the dimensions that the former president of the United States mentioned. Let me expound on this further. Why is this a paradigm shift? Because, as you know, and I think our very good Brigadier General mentioned this a while ago, that there is really the relationship between security and human rights. Um, in a very good paper, the former Assistant High Commissioner for Human Rights of the UN said that, human rights actually define human security. Why? Because there will be no security without the protection of human rights. And also, when you think about it, um, the development aspect really requires the prevention of conflict as well. When there are human rights abuses, when there are problems with human dignity, they will more often than not result into conflicts, and conflicts will breed uh, armed conflict or war. So they have the capacity, although it's not really a one-to-one relationship, they have the capacity to breed conflicts, and peace will be affected. So that's why it's very important for us to know that human rights and security, they both have they have a relationship with one another. To give a very interesting example here is that to tell you that sometimes when there are a lot of human rights abuses, there are conflicts, and the conflicts may arise to a level wherein there is armed conflict. We have seen that in countless of countries, in different societies. So I just want to point out also that the Philippines actually acknowledges the relationship between human rights and security in the non-traditional sense. which is human security. Of course, our starting point is the Constitution. So I'm reading to you Article 2, Section 3 of the 1987 Constitution, which I think we are all familiar with. It says that civilian authority is at all times supreme over the military, but it actually adds that the armed forces is the protector of the people and the state. What does it mean? All right. The Constitution could have just said that the armed forces is the protector of the state or the government. However, the Constitution adds the words the people. So this is a very human centered approach to security. It is not just about the state, it's also about the people. And there you begin to realize that really the armed forces, the military, they're also there for the people. So it is a human security approach. I would also like to add Article 2, Section 4, which says that the prime duty of the government is to serve and protect the people. So, to borrow from the, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this is still the motto of the AFP, protecting the people, securing the state. So it's about protecting the people and securing the state. So those are twofold goals, which goals that are found also in the Constitution. So I would also want to add here that uh, Article 16 of the Constitution provides that the state shall strengthen the patriotic spirit and nationalist consciousness of the military and respect for people's rights in the performance of their duties. Okay, what does it mean for all of us? I would like to take you back to history a little bit. Um, we have to remember that the Constitution, the 1987 Constitution, was born out of the ashes of the EDSA People Power. And if I may quote a constitutionalist, Father Joaquin Bernas, he would say that, you know, and because of this, the constitutional provision, we have really moved from the paradigm of just considering security from the traditional sense to a non-traditional sense encompassing human security and human rights. So he says that the intent of the phrase protector of the people was rather to make it as a corrective act to some of the military abuses experienced during martial law, and for the military to be the protector of both the people and the state. So what do you mean by protecting the people? It actually means that effectively there is now a people-centered approach towards security. I would also like to stress that globally, it's now also recognized that we have moved past beyond the perspective of security in the traditional sense. Um, this is a Security Council resolution stating that the security sector shall act without discrimination and with full respect for human rights and the rule of law, cornerstone of peace and sustainable development. Again, we begin to reconceive it because if there are human rights abuses, if there are problems with security, they might rise to the level of war and also affect the security of the country and also affect the security of the person. All right. So this is a new document, 2020 document. It illustrates this is a diagram from that document which illustrates that there is a dynamic relationship between human rights and peace and security, and human rights and development, and also between development and peace and security. For those of you who are probably new to the service, you might note that, and suddenly you will realize that the AFP is not just really there for circumstances of war or armed conflict. You also help out, and we are very thankful for that, in situations of disasters. in situations of other emergencies, in keeping our country safe, in keeping our borders tight. Of humans. Stress here that the UN Security Sector Reform Task Force said that upholding international standards requires promoting accountability and ending violations of international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and local laws. What it means is that the AFP, or the military for that matter, is not just an agency that should adhere to humanitarian law or the law of war. Should also adhere at all times to international human rights law and other local laws. It also strengthens respect for human rights, the rule of law, among other things. So, what is the implication of this? I said we will start with the relationship. The implication of this is that, first and foremost, the military or the uniformed services included, in general, I use it in a general here, are protectors of the people and not only the state. All right. What do you mean by protecting the people? It actually means that this is the second implication that I would just like to highlight. The military is actually a human rights actor. In what sense? In what sense is the military a human rights actor? Because the military preserves, protects the rights of the people. For instance, the military protects and preserves the right to life of the people when there is war, when there are disasters, and the military also protects the health of the people in some ways now that there's COVID by helping the government. So the military is not just a state actor, it is also a human rights actor. And again, because the military ensures human security. So from this kind of lens, we think that the military is not just an actor in the traditional sense. It is now an actor that respects, protects, and fulfill human rights. Sabi nga po ng inyong motto, protecting the people. That's when you protect somebody, it means you protect their rights. All right. So in that sense. So indeed, I would like to share a brief reflection here. This is actually a larger role for the military, an evolution compared to the traditional sense. But I think this is really a much needed evolution, although a larger role for the military. Because we now begin to conceive that conflicts may actually arise when there are human rights violations. Peace might be disturbed if there are human rights violations. So when we ensure that the rights of the people are protected, then we mitigate security risks. We alleviate them. And we, in fact, we protect the people in the process. All right. So now to my second point. Having conceived that really there's this relationship between human rights and security. I would just like to take a pause. This is actually a pause, just very brief, sort of a recall to all of us. To know that common is really means okay. As the education director of CHR, this is actually one of the problems that we face. A lot of people still, there's still a lot of confusion about what human rights mean. All right. Um, I will present to you for your consideration a very simple definition here. This definition is from the Philippine Supreme Court. I chose this definition because this is from our Supreme Court. In Simon versus Commission on Human Rights, the Supreme Court said that human rights are rights, meaning they are entitlements. They are not privileges, they are entitlements. In the sense that you are entitled to them, you should have them, and you have them. All right? These are rights or entitlements that we have, again, because we are human. So that's a very simple definition, but let's unpack it a little bit more. All right. What do we mean that by rights because we are human? What do we mean by that? Okay. I will answer that by giving you some negatives here. It means that human rights are not ordinary or legal rights. Okay? Because ordinary or legal rights can be taken away from you by legislation, by law. For example, you have the right to file a case and then your right lapses after a certain amount of time. You cannot file a case anymore after a certain amount of time. That one is actually a legal right because it means that it can be limited, it can be taken away from you. Compared to human rights cannot be taken away from you because you are a human. You are a human being, rather. Since you are a human being, you're a person, you have certain sets of rights that cannot be taken away from you. Okay. Another point that I would like to explain is that um, human rights are not from the government. They are not from the state. Because if they are from the government, if they are from the state, then the government or the state can take them away from you. As I said earlier, human rights are rights that belong to you because you are a human person. That's as simple as that. So, since you are a human person and you have rights as a human person, as a human being, when do rights apply? They apply all the time because you're human. You don't cease to be human. Okay? That's why you call them human rights. Compared to international humanitarian law, international humanitarian law is very specialized in one sense because it applies to situations of armed conflict. All right. So an illustration might actually help. For example, you buy a car, it's a thing, right? It's a thing, it's not human. You can actually sell it, you can actually dispose of it, you can destroy it, you can ignore it. Okay, as opposed to a person versus a car, you can do those things to a car, but to a person you cannot, because that person has rights, they have human rights. Okay, um, so you usually compare uh, a person from a thing, a human being from a thing, and a human being will have certain rights. Okay. It's still, I understand some people really think that human rights are very abstract, but it becomes very concrete in our daily lives. For example, if you are, if you, we say that one of the fundamental rights is the right to life. If you have the right to life, then your life should be protected. All right. You shouldn't be assaulted. You shouldn't be what do you call this? You shouldn't be arbitrarily detained, for example. So those things in violation of your right to life. So those things become concrete when you give concrete examples in the process. We will go to them much later on. Okay. Um, this is the question that we usually get. Since human rights are rights that you have because you are a person, then where are the rights from? Okay. This is actually a very philosophical question when you think about it. There are different opinions, the very different opinions. But the most popular view is that human rights come from the dignity of the person. If there is also sort of a religious explanation to that, in the sense that we are created in the image of God. Since we are created in the image of God, we have dignity like God in that sense. There is also the very pragmatic or practical explanation to this called the social contract explanation. What does it mean? It means that we are living in a society and the state is there to protect us. Since we have surrendered our rights to the state in order to live in a society that we have right now, the state should actually protect us in turn. And the protection is in the sense of rights. So social contract. It's like a contract that we made between the state, for example, the Philippines. So a very historical example of this is in the United States. In the United States, they had the Constitution in the 1700s. But you know, the you have all of those: the executive, the legislature, the judicial branches of government. But then they realize that, wait, those are the powers of the government. How about the person? So in order to sort of give power to the person against government, the abuses of government rather, they said we have to craft a Bill of Rights in the States. If you will notice, the bill is actually an amendment to the US Constitution because they thought that this was actually an afterthought by the framers. Okay, so I will just breeze through this. I know many of you are aware of this. Kinds of human rights, civil and political. So in the CHR, we'd like to speak of three kinds of human rights. First is civil and political. Second, economic, social, and cultural. Third, collective or group rights. What are civil rights? Civil rights are essentially those that guarantee your freedom. For example, freedom of speech, your right to life. Those things allow you to perform your liberties as a person. Political rights is different because political rights guarantee your the democratic freedom of access to the state. For example, what are political rights? How do you access the state? For example, you vote. You share your opinions or your thoughts about certain issues. That's your political right. Okay. Political rights are those that adhere to the individual in relation to the participation of the person in the affairs of the state. I know this is also still very nebulous or not so clear sometimes, but the concrete example of this is the right to vote. Okay, I'll give you some examples. Right to life, okay, civil and political rights, protection against arbitrary detention, arrest, slavery, torture, okay, equality before the law, non-discrimination, all right, freedom of thought, conscience, religion, okay. A very interesting question that always comes to my attention is this: if you have these rights, can the rights be limited? Yes, absolutely. Rights can be limited. And if you have rights, you also have responsibilities. It doesn't mean that you have rights, you don't have responsibilities anymore. But human rights apply all the time. They can just be limited. Okay. The next one is this: economic, social, and cultural rights. Economic and social rights are those that enable people to achieve social and economic development. Because if the rationale behind this is that if you're able to speak your mind, for example, in the sense of freedom of speech, but you don't have anything in your tummy, right? You will not be able to live a life with dignity. Okay. So examples of this necessarily are the right to food, so right to social security. So they enable you to live because it's not enough that you're able to speak your mind. It's also it is also the case that you should be able to live, all right, and have social and economic development. Cultural rights is a bit different. It actually refers to the right to ensure your well-being and to foster your culture, to preserve your culture, to enrich your culture. Okay. So these are some of the examples of economic, social, and cultural rights. You have housing, you have health, you have education, conditions of work, just and favorable conditions of work. I mentioned the right to food, okay, the right to social security. Right. This is a table of different laws that we have in the Philippines on human rights and internationally. Um, some people would like to speak of human rights as international concepts. However, I would like to stress that yes, human rights are international concepts, but human rights are also domestic concepts. Um, Remember that human rights are not from the law. They are from the fact that you are a human being. The most popular explanation, as I said, is from dignity, because you have dignity. You're entitled to live a life of dignity. But there are laws that ensure that you are able to live a life of dignity. This is why the laws are very important. So for example, on your left, on your screen, I'm just listing you for your consideration all of the examples there. These are treaties on human rights. These are the core treaties of human rights. When we say treaties, these are basically international commitments on human rights. These are the major ones. And on your right is a list of domestic laws that incorporate, or what we call in the law, transplant, that transplant the international to the domestic. So you will really see that there is a counterpart most of the time. In fact, 100% there's a counterpart. Um, on your left, you will see there at the very bottom the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. Okay, it's in red because we're not yet a party to that convention. Um, but you will see that there is already a law against enforced or involuntary disappearances. All right. Before I end on this very short section or refresher on human rights, I would just like to stress one thing. Just one thing. If there's one thing that you will get out of this very short lecture, please remember this. Um, in Filipino, we call human rights karapatang pantao. Why? Actually, that's a uh, very powerful term, karapatang pantao. It's karapatang pantao because it is not just about your right. When you think about it, when you ponder about it, karapatang pantao means nararapat sa tao. I actually prefer that. Karapatang pantao, nararapat sa tao. And those things are really for you because you are a human being. You're not a thing. You're not a plant, for example. You're not a car. You are a person. If you are a person created in the image and likeness of God, from this is another explanation, the religious explanation, created in the image of God, then you have certain rights. From a social contract theory, government is there to protect you. How should the government protect you? The government should protect your rights. All right. And then from a dignity point of view perspective, you have dignity, dignidad inside of you, from the Latin term dignidus. So if you have that, it means it's inside of you, right? It cannot be taken away from you. Nararapat sa tao. It's rightly for you as a human being. Kaya karapatang pantao. Okay, so now I'll move to the security sector. Some specific instruments for the human rights in the security sector. I would like to start with a short a phrase. No, a short word for this. A word. Okay. I'd like to stress that since human rights apply at all times and to everyone, the security sector should comply with all the relevant principles that I have discussed above. Okay. And also, sometimes people forget this. On the same line of reasoning, the security sector, the military included, also has human rights at all times and are entitled to human rights because we're all humans here. But there are specific concerns on rights in the security sector. So there have been instruments and principles on this matter. Okay. There are, I'm listing here for we don't have much time, but usually I teach human rights law for one semester, but there I'm listing down a few instruments here for you to look into. Um, these are very specific for the military from the side of human rights. I think the most important one here is the UN Code of Conduct for Law Enforcement Officials. This was adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly. Well, there are provisions about confidentiality, about the proportional use of force, about necessity. These are separate things. And then many other things. These are just eight principles that we should all keep in mind. I can probably elaborate on them in the Q&A. In the 1990, there is a basic. Okay, it's in the 1990s. Um, in Cuba, they had these basic principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officials. Okay, and then in just last year, the UN came out with the guidance on less lethal weapons in law enforcement. And of course, the if we will count the international humanitarian law, then international humanitarian law can also be put side by side with human rights principles. But again, as I said, IHL applies during wartime only or when there's armed conflict. Okay. There are other principles, but these are not really directly on point to the military. Uh, if you will read through all of them, there is the set of principles that are applicable during detention or imprisonment. Okay, principles of justice for victims of crime and abuse of power. Principles that relate to extralegal, arbitrary, and summary executions. Principles that relate to non-custodial measures. Okay, I would also want to add here some local developments. Of course, we have all of those laws that I mentioned earlier about human rights, but and then we have 9851, Republic Act 9851 on IHL, but that's really IHL. So I will now try to concentrate on some developments, recent developments on the law with regard to the military. Of course, I just we don't have much time, but I selected the most salient ones, in my opinion. The first is on the responsibility of law enforcement authorities. This is the doctrine of command responsibility. Second one, which was brought before the Supreme Court several times recently, is about human rights and martial law. And then um, we know also that there are now writs for the protection of rights. The most salient ones include the writ of amparo. This is the protection of the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Command responsibility, EO number 226, 1995. This is a principle where a superior officer is held liable for knowledge of a crime that is to be committed, being committed, and has committed by the subordinate, and the superior did not take any preventive or corrective action before, during, or after the commission. So, in the case of Rodriguez versus Macapagal Arroyo, the Supreme Court enacted a human rights violation in the context of command. The superior officer can also be held liable if they this is okay. The application of this was in the case of Rodriguez versus Macapagal Arroyo, where Supreme Court clarified that policy of enforced disappearances, it doesn't automatically impute responsibility to the president, because all of the elements should be complied with. There has to be a piece of evidence that could establish responsibility or abduction. Okay? So you can just read it through. Okay. As regards martial law, the martial law situation in the country, we all know that in the 1987 Constitution, unlike before, the Constitution, the Constitution clarified that human rights shall not be suspended during martial law. They are to remain effective. Why? Again, because human rights are applicable at all times. I very well. And iterated in the cases of Lagman versus Medialdea, Lagman versus Pimentel recently. Okay. Um, I would also want to add before we close. I think we don't have much time, but I think most of the questions can be clarified in the Q&A. Um, I'd like to share a few thoughts on the progress, prospects, and possibilities, or what I call the road ahead about human rights in the uniformed service. For your consideration, there's a quote here, the Memorandum of Understanding between the AFP and the CHR signed just this year, where in the AFP and the CHR said that they recognize commitments to human rights. So, some progress and prospects. I started with the traditional concept of security. So it is definitely a progress now that there is more of a recognition of human rights in the operations of the military and in the law. Now we know that human security is not just limited to the traditional sense. It also, to protect the people also means to protect their rights. So that is a positive development. Of course, to protect the rights in the context of the mandate and operations of the AFP. We also, there was a, let me just go back. There's also now, I see as a positive development, the inclusion of human rights in plans. For example, I know that in the national security strategy, there is a clause there about the integration of human rights approaches. And I think previously, if I'm not mistaken, in the Bayanihan, there was a mention of human rights in the non-traditional security sense. And also, we now notice that because of the change in the perspective, there is now a chance for accountability for for human rights violations by and against the military. Okay. We now also know that because of the different, because of the inclusion of human rights in the education and training program. So, for example, to give you an update, we are thinking of future initiatives together, like an online human rights academy and other continued trainings. Um, Human rights education is also now um, a requirement in certain cases by the PMA. I think you have the PMA has a course on human rights, or at least in a course, there's a component of human rights. And then there is also a ladderized program for human rights education. And recently, there have been close collaborations between the two. I'll give you just some examples. There is this Labresa Declaration on Human Rights Cooperation of 2012. We have a training curricula for the military. And recently, now we have the Memorandum of Understanding. What about human rights and the uniformed service system? I think there should be greater recognition of what people don't understand is that the AFP is also a human rights defender. I'll give you an example. The number one example would be you protect the right to life of the people when there is war, when there is armed conflict. In that sense, you are a human rights defender. So I think there should be a greater recognition. It is from a non-traditional perspective. And I think there should be also, we see it now, an intensified education and training program for the military. But the challenge also, if I may, is to consistently translate plans into concrete action, including counter-insurgency operations. And of course, we also have to move past beyond the challenges and the institutional divides that we have towards greater collaboration. Okay, I'll end there. I think I might have went over time for a bit. The topic is too much, too broad, but I tried to succinctly deliver it to you. I hope you learned a lot, and thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on this webinar series. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Attorney Tom Temprosa. Now we move on to our second speaker. Our next speaker is to discuss the CHR and its current programs. Is the executive director and spokesperson of the CHR herself, Attorney Jacqueline Ann Deguia. Attorney Deguia is a graduate of the University of the Philippines in Baguio City, having obtained a degree in Bachelor of Social Sciences, double major in psychology and political science, and finished her law studies at the University of the Cordilleras. She was the CHR Regional Director of the Southern Tagalog and Mimaropa for 6 years and was also a college and law professor. She has been the Philippines Torture Prevention Ambassador for the APT-APF Joint Initiative, having implemented a nationwide project which culminated in a national summit, and she is also an alumna of the International Visitor Leadership Program of the U.S. State Department. As a spokesperson of the Commission on Human Rights since September 2016, Attorney De Gia amplifies the statements of the CHR on pressing human rights issues. She was previously the director of the Public Affairs and Strategic Communications Office of the CHR and was a project manager of an externally funded initiative for 2 years. With all these sterling accomplishments, Attorney De Gia in February 2018 became the executive director of the Commission of Human Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Attorney Jacqueline Ann Cruz De Gia, the executive director and spokesperson of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines. Ma'am?
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Escrivas, for that kind introduction. And I would like to wish everyone a pleasant good afternoon. In particular, I would like to greet Brigadier General Jose Alejandro Naknak, Cavalier Amado P. Espino, Chairman of the Philippine Military Academy Alumni Association, Lieutenant General Ferdinand M. Bocobo, President of the PMAAAI Foundation for Truth and Justice Incorporated, as well as Lieutenant General Amado P. Espino. I'd also like to greet the men and women of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, as well as my colleagues in CHR. A pleasant afternoon. I would like at the onset congratulate and laud the AFPCLOAC, the PFTJI, as well as the PMI Alumni Association for coming up with this noteworthy initiative. This series of trainings, I hope, will in the end clarify a lot of misconceptions about human rights and about CHR in general. And we do hope that at the end of this engagement, many of us will realize that we have been all along human rights advocates and human rights defenders. The topic that has been assigned to me this afternoon is to discuss in detail the CHR mandate as well as its programs and activities. I do hope that one basic house rule will be observed by our participants in today's webinar. I just hope that all of you will give me your undivided attention, and I hope that you will have an open mind all throughout this webinar series. Please cast aside first your biases and your prejudices, and I do hope that you will give me an opportunity to present to you CHR in an entirely new light. Having said that, my discussion will try to answer most of the common misconceptions of the public as well as of many in the uniform sector. And I do hope that our subsequent discussion during the open forum will be insightful as well. First of all, as members of the armed forces, there are still some technical difficulties. I'll just wait for my PowerPoint presentation to be uploaded. We're just waiting for the organizer to allow us to upload our PowerPoint presentation. But while that is ongoing, I'd just like to mention that as members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the rule of law appeals to all of us. And it's very important that we are always anchored on the legal framework. And my presentation will begin by citing the legal basis for the creation of the CHR. And what we will show to you is that CHR was created none other by the highest law of the land, which is the 1987 Philippine Constitution. And it's also noteworthy to mention that CHR, by virtue of its creation by the 1987 Philippine Constitution, is a government agency. One of the common misconceptions about the CHR is that it is an NGO or a civil society organization. So like you, like the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the CHR is actually a government agency. We recall that in Article 13, of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, it is explicitly stated that there is hereby created an independent office called the Commission on Human Rights, and we would like to emphasize the word independent. And later on, I will show you in the next slide that the CHR is part of the government, however, does not fall under the three branches of the government, the executive, legislative, or the judiciary, but rather finds itself in the company of constitutional commissions or offices. So in the last column, you would see that we are part of the Constitutional Fiscal Autonomy Group, consisting of the Civil Service Commission, the Commission on Elections, the Commission on Audit, the Office of the Ombudsman, and the Commission on Human Rights. And that is where we source our independence. It's particularly important that the CHR is not under the executive, the legislative, or the judiciary, because we want to make sure that we are able to monitor government's compliance with its treaty obligations. Now, it's very important also to realize that as a constitutional office, part of our mandate is to look at the legitimate use of power. So it would also be insightful to have an analogy with the COA. If COA looks at the efficient use of resources vis-a-vis its rules and regulations, and then the CHR looks at the legitimate use of power vis-a-vis the international and domestic human rights framework. So we do recognize that power is very essential to the state. We do have manifestations of that as exercised by the executive through its police power. However, we want to make sure that it is in accordance with the rule of law. Many do say that the CHR is anti-government, so we beg to the contrary. We do say that we are part of the government, but in many instances, when there is reason to speak out against alleged human rights violations, we do so in our advisory role. So a very good analogy again in this regard would be to liken the CHR to our conscience, because the CHR is the conscience of government. It is still part of the government. In times of peace or in times where there are no human rights violations or allegations thereof, it does keep quiet and it supports the government in this regard. But when there is reason to do so, then like a conscience, it does have to speak out. And later on, I will show you the legal provision which provides for this. I'd also like to mention that Article 2 of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, as mentioned by Director Tom a while ago, provides that the state values the dignity of every human person and full respect for human rights. This provision is particularly important, and he stressed a while ago that the same provision is found in Article 2, which provides for the state policy and which also provides for the mandate of the armed forces of the Philippines. And we'd just like to emphasize here that human rights is just as legal as the mandate of the armed forces of the Philippines. And basically, it espouses the basic principle or premise that human rights is primarily a state obligation. Again, we'd like to emphasize the word primarily as the operational word here, because later on we will find out that human rights is actually the obligation of everyone. But as mentioned by Attorney Tom a while ago, one opinion is because of the social contract theory, that in exchange of the votes that we give to our elected officials, then they promise to guarantee our enjoyment of human rights. And that is very much evident during the campaign season. We do see many of those who ran for office promising, say, for example, the provision of basic services which pertain to the human rights of people. And by virtue of the trust reposed upon our officials, then there is a corollary responsibility on their part to ensure human rights fulfillment. This infographic illustrates it best, no? How the state is able to value the dignity of every human person and basically fulfill its basic responsibility of human rights. So we do have four elements of a state, and the state is very much visible through the government, through the embodiment of its state agents. And particularly, the executive is able to carry out its human rights obligation through the creation of different agencies which will now cater to different forms of human rights. So it is actually a misconception to think that CHR will be the prime mover in terms of human rights. In this illustration, we will find out that it is actually the government which has the primary responsibility of fulfilling human rights. And it is through for example, the right to life, liberty, and property is protected by the PNP. The right to health is promoted by the Department of Health. The right to social security by the SSS and GSIS. The right to education by the Department of Education. And the right to work by the Department of Labor and Employment. And the Commission on Human Rights in this regard is merely the watchdog, the monitor, the advocate, and the educator of government. But basically, it rests upon the executive to ensure that the rights of everyone, most especially the public, are guaranteed in exchange of the trust reposed upon them, or as Attorney Tom has mentioned a while ago, by virtue of the contract reposed upon them. So in this regard, we do see state agents, you and I alike, as duty bearers, and the public as rights holders. And many again would say, paano naman kami as soldiers, we also have human rights. And we do agree with you that because you are humans, you also have human rights. There is no question about it. But because we are duty bearers, because we have voluntarily taken it upon ourselves to serve in the government, we have, during our oath taking, promised to put the rights of others first before that of our own. And in exchange for that, taxpayers' money, which is very valuable and which we have a responsibility to account for, is given to us in exchange for that valuable service. And we do thank the AFP as well as other members of the security sector for taking on that very noble and fulfilling responsibility of protecting our human rights. And as I would always candidly say during my previous lectures, I would always mention that it is actually utang na loob namin, mga ordinaryong mamamayan, kung kami ay nakakatulog ng mahimbing dahil sa mga ginagawa ng ating mga kapulisan, mga kasundaluhan para siguraduhin na protektado tayong lahat. Not to mention or not to minuscule, of course, your own rights, but only because we in the government sector has taken on that higher and added responsibility of putting the rights of others first before that of our own. And I must emphasize too that when we took that role, it was purely voluntary on our part. And for that, we thank you. Moving on to the powers and the functions of the CHR. The CHR, as the primary national human rights institution of the country, is mandated to investigate all forms of human rights violations. So we do have 16 regional offices all over the country. We do only have offices at the regional level, unlike some government offices which have presence in the municipal and in the city level. We don't have such. And one of the sources of misconception is when do the CHR take cognizance of cases? So we have here 5 infographics which will illustrate clearly when the CHR will take cognizance of a case. And I would like to emphasize again, going back to my previous slide a while ago, that in not all instances will the CHR take cognizance of a violation of a right, because the violation of rights of ordinary beings, whenever it is covered by the revised penal code, will be the responsibility of the Philippine National Police and other law enforcement agencies. The CHR will take cognizance of a special case of instances instead. And these are the 5 instances. Again, tulad na nasabi ko kanina, hindi kami pulis pangkalawakan. Kapag common crime, hindi papasok si CHR, but rather it will be the Philippine National Police because it's covered by the revised penal code. And that is very evident in this infographic. So we do say, in the second half of the infographic, if, for example, a wrong has been committed, a right has been violated, but the alleged perpetrator happens to be a private person, then that will be deemed as a common crime, and the state will now take action against that wrong through the prosecution of that offender using the revised penal code. And in these instances, we do encourage the public to go to the police instead in fulfillment of their right to be protected against in their right to be protected in terms of life, liberty, and security. However, if, for example, the alleged perpetrator happens to be a state agent or bahagi ng gobyerno, then it can be properly considered as a human rights violation and not merely an abuse. And therefore, aside from the police, then the CHR can also conduct an investigation. So to explain this further, we have another infographic. The basic question would be why. So again, if for example, there is an arbitrary deprivation of life, but the perpetrator happens to be a private person, the crime committed is murder or homicide. If, for example, the crime is committed by a state agent, then we would say that it's an extrajudicial killing. However, there is no anti-EJK law yet, no? The next slide will explain, will be a better illustration of my point. Say, for example, a person has been illegally kidnapped or detained, then the crime committed, if the perpetrator is a private person, is Article 267 or kidnapping and serious illegal detention. However, if, for example, the alleged perpetrator happens to be a state agent, a soldier, or a policeman in that regard, then aside from kidnapping and serious illegal detention, the special crime of enforced disappearance is committed. And if you would notice, the law treats these perpetrators differently. Considering the fact that human rights is primarily a state responsibility. And as I have mentioned a while ago, as government officials, we are held to a standard, to a higher level of standard. Then the punishment is higher, and there is another added special law that will punish it. No, that's the difference between a common crime and a crime committed by a state agent. Say, for example, in terms of injuries committed by a private person, then that would only be a violation of Article 263 of the revised penal code. However, if the perpetrator happens to be a state agent, then that can be properly considered as torture in addition to physical injuries. Again, there's an added responsibility and the penalty is higher only because there is a higher responsibility on the part of state agents not to violate the law or not to abuse the law or not to abuse their power in this regard. It is unfortunate, however, going back to the slide on EJK, that up until now, we still don't have a law on EJK. So we have achieved great strides in the area of torture and in the area of enforced disappearances. We have seen that it is actually the responsibility of the state to make sure that government officials are held to a higher standard of accountability by virtue of the trust reposed upon them and by virtue of the responsibility to use power legitimately. So one of the things that we have clamored is to make sure that in aid of legislation, an anti-EJK law is also passed by Congress. The second instance that the CHR investigates are those cases committed by non-state actors. One of the misconceptions in the past has been that CHR will only go after state agents. That is not the case. We have consistently espoused violence. We believe in the rule of law. similar to the Armed Forces of the Philippines. We do believe that the exercise of rights must be done in a non-violent way, and it must be done in a manner that does not aggrieve the rights of others as well. And as Attorney Tom mentioned, not only that do we have the international humanitarian law, but a domestic equivalent, RA 9851. And therefore, any violations committed by non-state actors during internal armed conflicts are also cognizable by the CHR. The third instance where the CHR conducts an investigation is where the victims happen to be members of the vulnerable sector. One of the mandates of the CHR is to ensure that the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the poor are given special care and assistance. And this has roots in the concept of social justice. We want to make sure that those who have less in life have more in law. And this is where, say, for example, the most often question, why do we have VAUSI and why we don't have violence against men? We have to look at it from the concept of vulnerability. A woman, though equal to a man, has inherent vulnerabilities biologically and socially. Say, for example, a married woman who has been abused by a husband, say, for example, in a particular situation, has physical vulnerabilities. And even if, for example, they have the same weight, we do know that men are more strong than women physically, and there are more vulnerable parts of a woman that would subject her to many injuries in case there is domestic abuse. We do also know that socially, women have been predisposed to acknowledge that it is their fault. And if, for example, they go to their support systems, such as the neighborhood and such as their families, they are discouraged from parting ways from their husbands. And so these multiple vulnerabilities which a woman encounters is now sought to be remedied by Congress through Article 13, through the enactment of laws that will now make sure that social justice is realized. And in this regard, Congress would now enact legislation that will seek to make the woman equal in the eyes of the law. And that has been the VAUSI law. So we now do see manifestations of social justice laws that have been legislated. RA 7610 for children. We do have the Magna Carta for senior citizens because they are a vulnerable group. We do have a special law for ITs. We do have a special law for, and we are trying now to legislate law for, say, for example, LGBTQI. The special purpose is because we want to make sure that the vulnerabilities experienced by these sectors are compensated for by law. And in this regard, the CHR, because of its special mandate, also investigates violations committed against members of these sectors. The fourth instance, when the CHR would take cognizance of a particular case, is when the alleged perpetrator again happens to be a member of the government or a state agent. And in this regard, the government agent or official has committed non-feasance, malfeasance, and misfeasance. Remember that as advocates for the rule of law, especially for the armed forces of the Philippines, we abhor shortcuts. We want our people to follow established rules and protocols. Say, for example, the Philippine National Police, they have their own manual of operations. We would want all policemen to follow their own manual of operations. We would like the police to also follow the 1987 Constitution, and we would also like them to follow all laws under the revised penal code and all other special laws. We don't want them We don't want anyone in the government to have their own interpretations, to have shortcuts, or to totally disregard the law, because we are all firm believers in the rule of law. And when CHR evaluates and investigates these cases, we would like to reassure you that we don't have any other parameter, or we don't have any other reference except the law itself. Because like you, we do advocate for the rule of law. And we want it to be a strict adherence to the rule of law. And therefore, any deviation, any shortcut, any misinterpretation of the law is something that we would investigate. And finally, one of the instances where we also investigate cases is those committed by non-state actors, particularly businesses. I began my presentation by saying that the state is that has the primary responsibility of human rights protection. However, because of globalization, we have seen that many businesses have become richer than entire countries. It might be interesting for many to know, for example, that Apple is now worth a colossal of 3 million, has overtaken the economies of the world's largest countries by areas such as Russia and Canada. And that emphasizes a very important point. And basically, what I'm driving at is businesses have become very influential. We look at Facebook, they do impact human rights. Say, for example, the right to uh, information and the right to accurate information. We have seen misinformation and disinformation in the past few years. And we now call on businesses to ensure compliance to the RUGI framework, the Respect, Protect, and Remedy framework. Although what is sad is that uh, this framework is merely voluntary because, di ba, if we go to the International Framework of Human Rights, which is anchored on the United Nations, we do see that it is actually the states who are the members of the United Nations. And as Attorney Tom has mentioned a while ago, human rights is an essential pillar in the United Nations. You cannot have security and development without human rights. And though these three come hand in hand, and we have increasingly also called on businesses to make sure that they adhere to a higher standard of corporate social responsibility. And that does not only mean paying lip service to human rights, but really impacting human rights in a real and truthful way. The second important mandate of the CHR is its visitorial power. We have been mandated by the Constitution to exercise visitorial powers over jails, prisons, or detention facilities. And this is further expanded by the Anti-Torture Act and the Anti-Enforced Disappearance Act. And I hope that many will understand that when we conduct jail visitations, we do not do so in the hope of looking for cases or filing cases against the uniformed personnel. In this illustration, you will see evidence that the reason why we conduct visitorial activities over detention facilities is because we want to improve the conditions in jails, and that is not only for the benefit of the detainees but also of the detention custodians themselves. So here, after our visitorial activities, we do write to the authorities in order that the deplorable conditions are acted upon. I also wish to emphasize that under the Anti-Torture Act and under the Anti-Enforced Disappearance Act, the power of the CHR is to conduct on-the-spot, unhampered, and unrestricted access to all detention facilities without need of prior coordination. Otherwise, the purpose of the law will be defeated if we were to coordinate our visits with the authorities. However, because we also recognize that security is a valid concern, we will present to you our valid IDs as well as our mission order so that you are assured of our identities. The third important mandate of the Commission on Human Rights is actually spearheaded by Director Tom. We have been mandated by the Constitution to establish a continuing program of research, education, and information to enhance respect for primacy of human rights. It's been a constant challenge to teach human rights. It's actually a source of confusion on our part how people can actually think that they can dispense of their human rights when they themselves are humans, and when human rights are indispensable in order to have a meaningful life, as Attorney Tom has mentioned a while ago. It's very important that we realize how important rights are. And with the Strategic Communications Division, we have made it part of our mandate to simplify, amplify, and present an unbiased perspective on human rights and about CHR, so that increasingly the public will find out that human rights is actually a beautiful concept, that the CHR is actually a supporter of the government and of its programs, and that we are all advocates and defenders of human rights. We do also have, we cater to different sectors. We go all over the Philippines. We have information officers. We conduct lectures, trainings, and seminars. And the Armed Forces of the Philippines has also been one constant partner in this regard. And we do hope that it will be a continuing engagement on the part of the two institutions. Another mandate is to provide appropriate legal measures for protection of human rights of all persons within the Philippines as well as Filipinos residing abroad. I just like to emphasize to you that we recognize that OFW workers are actually part of the vulnerable sector, and we do cater to their rights. We also recommend to Congress effective measures to promote human rights, to provide compensation to victims of violations of human rights or their families. It may be known to many that the CHR participates in many legislative sessions, and we do submit our position papers and our advisories in support of laws which advocate for human rights, and where we also categorically state our position whether a law will be harmful to human rights or not. And this we do in our advisory role. We do hope that government at the end of the day will listen, especially through Congress. You will see here an example of one of my work as the Torture Prevention Ambassador of the Philippines. I have submitted a position paper on the PNP modernization bill. Again, we do believe that a stronger PNP and a stronger AFP with well-funded resources is key to making it professionalized and in making sure that it is able to protect human rights very well. And then we also grant financial assistance to victims of human rights violations. We also had a big role in continuing the work of the Human Rights Compensation Claims Board. And another function that we have is also to monitor government's compliance with international treaty obligations on human rights. And again, I'd just like to clarify that if you will scrutinize all of the treaties which the Philippines is a signatory of, it's actually the government or the state which is a party to it, not the CHR. And therefore, in many instances, we do remind government of the treaties that they have entered into. And it's part of our mandate to monitor compliance. And therefore, if we see that the Philippine government is deviating from the contract or from the treaty or from the agreement that it itself has voluntarily entered into, we do remind the government about it, and we call them out. We speak truth to power only because, again, it is the function reposed to us by the 1987 Constitution. And we wish to emphasize again that these treaties are binding treaties, and this again have been entered voluntarily, and it reflects uh, it reflects on the track record of the Philippines if it were to comply, or it will also reflect adversely if it were not to comply with its treaty obligations. And we are happy to note that the Philippines is a signatory to many international human rights treaties, and that is the first step towards human rights compliance. However, a more important indicator of its compliance will be to translate all of these treaties into domestic legislation. And we have been successful in many occasions on that regard. Say, for example, the Convention Against Torture has a domestic equivalent, the Anti-Torture Act. Uh, but we increasingly urge the government to make sure also that aside from having domestic equivalents of these international treaties, compliance, concrete manifestations of the role of the state or the responsibility of the state to protect will also be done by the government, not only that of the responsibility to fulfill. Because as Attorney Tom has mentioned, there is the state responsibility to protect, respect, as well as to fulfill. The responsibility to fulfill is done when we have domestic equivalents of the international treaties, but it's also very important that the state respects and protects human rights through the implementation of these treaties. And then the last mandate of the Commission is to request assistance of any department, bureau, office, or agency in the performance of its functions. So the 1987 recognizes the critical role of the Commission in terms of human rights promotion and protection, and thereby encourages other agencies to help it as well. And we are grateful to the AFPCLOAC for being a valuable partner all through these years in making sure that we are able to carry out our mandate. I, for example, when I was the regional director of Calabarzon and Mimaropa, was aided by the 76 ID in Bondoc Peninsula in terms of installing the farmers in relation to the agrarian reform law, and we have heeded their request to articulate to the AFP the setting up of detachments because the presence of armed groups were monitored in that area, and they have in many instances provided much needed support to us, DAR, as well as DNR in the installation of farmers, and that is just to name a few instances where we have partnered with the AFP. I'd also like to emphasize that we have additional mandates given to us by special laws, RA 9344, RA 9745, which I particularly emphasized a while ago, RA 9851, which you are sufficiently familiar with, RA 9372 are the Human Security Act, and we now have the Anti-Terror Law. And then we have RA 9710, the Magna Carta of Women, where the role of the CHR's gender ombud is given emphasis. We have the Anti-Enforced Disappearance Law of 2012, the HR Victims Reparation and Recognition Act of 2013, or RA 10368, and we have RA 9262, which is the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2004. And then in addition, we also have RA 1106, RA 11036, which is very relevant nowadays, the Mental Health Act, which again expanded our visitorial power to cover mental health institutions as well. RA 11313, the Safe Space Act. And then we also have the Philippine HIV and AIDS Policy Act. This is also very relevant to you, the special protection of children in situations of armed conflict. We have repeatedly condemned the use of child soldiers by non-state actors. And of course, in recognition of the rights of women, we have the 105-day expanded maternity leave law. I'd also like to mention to all our participants in today's webinar that CHR has its counterparts in other parts of the world, similar to the AFP. We do have national human rights institutions. We call our organization as such. And we do have a framework, and that is called the UN Paris Principles. And it's very important for national human rights institutions, such as the CHR, to demonstrate independence, pluralism, broad mandate, transparency, accessibility, and operational efficiency. And I would like to emphasize the word independence. It's a continuing effort on the part of the CHR to make sure that we are independent. Though we are part of government, again, like the COA, whenever it addresses fiscal issues, it maintains a very objective point of view. And that is how we regard ourselves. We want to make sure that we have a very objective point of view, that in the conduct of an investigation, what will prevail will be the pieces of evidence, regardless of who the parties are. And in this regard, I also ask for your understanding that in many circumstances, it is essential that investigation as the first pillar of justice will have to be undertaken in order for us to know the truth. We do know how important investigation is in ferreting out the truth. Conducting an investigation does not necessarily mean that there is already a conclusion, or there is already an accusation, or there is already a human rights violation. It is the first crucial step in finding out whether or not the allegations are true. And therefore, we as government officials, we as advocates for truth, would want to make sure that an impartial investigation is conducted by bodies. And we would like to assure you that in the CHR, we are very independent and we are very impartial. And in fact, our processes for investigation are very human rights based approach. Ours is the only investigation process that bothers to go out of its way to get your position or to get your defense. And that is the reason why I would always jokingly say in my previous lectures that when you receive a subpoena, it's actually a recognition of your right to due process. And you have to be happy if you receive a subpoena, because it means that we are affording you an opportunity to be heard, and your defenses will be properly considered before we come up with a finding. And we are not pro-complainant. It does not matter who files the complaint. At the end of the day, what will matter will be the evidence, the impartial evidence, and the weight of those evidences which we are able to gather in the conduct of our impartial investigation. I'd also like to mention to you, as an anecdotal evidence, that before this administration, I can confidently say to you that in not all instances was there a very high number of cases filed against the AFP. And in fact, if you will also scrutinize the sheer number of operations that we carry out on a daily basis, vis-a-vis the number of times that we have out, uh, called you out or conducted an investigation, it will just be a very small percentage. And in those occasions where the CHR has not taken cognizance of a case, or in those instances when the CHR has not issued a statement, then it means that you are basically doing human rights work. And that is the reason why I said a while ago that many of us at the end of this webinar series will realize that you have been human rights advocates and human rights defenders all along. Because if you do your job well, if you strictly adhere to the rule of law and the rules of engagement of the AFP, as well as the law of the land, then basically that already in a nutshell is the essence of human rights work. You have basically protected the people, and you have basically protected the state, and you have done a good job in terms of human rights protection and promotion. And I would always also liken the nature of the work of the CHR to your JAGO or to the IAS of PNP, di ba? We always have a system of checks and balances within the system. So CHR is also part of the government. It's not anti-government. It's not critical of the government when it conducts investigation. But it is important for it to know, check, balance the legitimate use of power, because power, if abused, countenances the purpose and instead defeats human rights. It's also, I would also like to emphasize that the Commission on Human Rights is a pluralistic body. By pluralism, we mean that all 5 commissioners, by the way, our commission NBank is on its 5th term already, and we have 1 chairperson and 4 commissioners. And the UN Paris Principles requires that all of our commissioners come from diverse backgrounds in order to represent diverse perspectives on human rights. We do know how broad the area of human rights is, how many thematic issues are actually concerned. We would want to make sure that all of those thematic issues are actually well represented. So right now, we do have Commissioner Leia Tanodra Armamento, who used to be DOJ Undersecretary. We do have Commissioner Gwendolyn Pimentel Gana, who used to work at OSG and who used to work at Congress, again bringing another fresh perspective to the CHR. And then we have Commissioner Totsi, who came from civil society. And then we have Commissioner Karen Gomez Dumpit, an insider who used to be the director of Child Rights and the Government Linkages Office. And of course, Chairperson Jose Luis Martin Sigascon, who used to be a member of the who used to be a member of the 1987 constitutional delegation, which drafted the 1987 Constitution, who used to be who used to work in OPAP and DepEd also. And our commission does not decide the decision power. The decision-making power is not vested in one individual alone, because they are 5. It's a collegial body. They decide by by virtue of a majority vote. And the third principle is broad mandates. And we have exhaustively discussed that a while ago. Transparency, accessibility, as well as operational efficiency. Again, I would like to share to all of you that we are status A accredited only because we demonstrate these principles or these characteristics very well. We are accredited on a periodic basis, and that is why we also urge you to support the CHR, because if, for example, it does not demonstrate independence, similar to the National Human Rights Institution of Thailand, it's been downgraded to status B from status A. And that has repercussions and implications in terms of the human rights situation in the country and the human rights track record of the Philippine government. So a government that is supportive of the CHR, a government that funds the CHR, and a government that allows the CHR to do its job will also project an image of human rights compliance to the international community, which is very important because, like the state, we also undergo accreditation. And as a status A member of GANRI, it gives us a chance to speak before the UN bodies, and during these situations, we do endeavor to broadly represent the public as well as civil society. The same framework, the UN Paris Principles, also mandates the CHR to be a bridge to civil society. There are be a bridge between the civil society and the government. And that is why, if you will recall, most especially those who have been active members of the armed forces during the past few years, we have had a lot of community-based dialogues. We partnered during these instances, and we wanted to make sure that we serve as a bridge mechanism, as a venue, and as a platform to make known to you what are the issues, the concerns, and the challenges at the grassroots level, so that you can act on it. And that has also been a concrete manifestation of how the La Bresa Declaration has brought our two institutions closer. I also like to mention to you that the Philippines is the first country in Asia to establish an NHRI, and we were established as a response to grave human rights abuses experienced by Filipino people during the martial law rule. So in sum, these are basically the role of the CHR is to be the advocate of human rights. Say, for example, right now in the COVID-19 pandemic, we are advocating for vaccination. Our campaign is entitled Vaccine for All. We do recognize government's efforts to ensure that the right to health is protected. And we staunchly advocate that everyone, especially those in the vulnerable sector, are vaccinated and no one is left behind. We are also the watchdog of government. We are also the advisor or the conscience of government, and we are the educator of government. We are your partner in human rights protection and promotion. As contrasted to the basic perception that pervades many, we are not the prime player in human rights protection and promotion. It's really the state, the government, especially through the executive, but CHR stands as a support mechanism to advocate, to watch out for, to advise, and to educate the government. Throughout the years, one of the criticisms of CHR is that it's biased and it's anti-government. It's very critical. And we have endeavored through the past years to counter the narrative and to project the real truth about the Commission on Human Rights. In the previous years, we did not have platforms such as social media to amplify our stance on many issues. And it's been unknown to the public how we partner with other government agencies, how we engage in different activities, and how when we, for example, stay quiet means we support those policies and programs which cater to human rights. But the Strategic Communications Division has developed a campaign. It's entitled OK Cards. Again, O stands for Obligasyon plus Karapatan. We do believe that with rights comes responsibilities also. And this OK campaign gives a thumbs up sign to all government policies, projects, and initiatives which actually cater to human rights. So we try to identify on a daily basis what are those programs So these are examples of our OK cards. Whenever we see that there are various programs being catered to by different agencies, we make sure that we recognize them, to encourage, to motivate, and to let them know that they are doing a good job in terms of human rights protection or promotion. So again, it emphasizes my basic point that if government comes up with programs, projects, and policies that are geared towards human rights, say for example, the Organic Agriculture Act, the Universal Health Act, the Free Education Act, then those are actually human rights programs and policies. And we are actually partners in those regards. And we are saying the same thing in terms of advocating for human rights. And therefore, if you do that, if a government agency does that, if a government of official does that, if a government employee does that, then they are human rights advocates and they are human rights defenders. So, and then many have also said that we only investigate the AFP or the PNP, and we do not, and we condone the NPA. So that is far from the truth. We do not condone violence. We abhor violence. We believe in democracy. We believe in non-violent ways of exercising rights guaranteed by the Constitution. And therefore, we have released numerous statements which condemn the atrocities committed by the NPA. These are some examples of that, including the use of child soldiers, to demonstrate that to you that we are very fair and impartial. And then, as mentioned a while ago by Director Tom and by General Naknak, we continue to partner and engage with the AFP. And the recent development, noteworthy development, was the signing of an MOU, which provides for increased education and training, information sharing, and referral of cases, and as well as improved monitoring and reporting of incidents. And going ahead of General Naknak, probably I just also like to mention to you that we are in constant dialogue on how to make the clearance system be better and be more efficient and be less tedious for applicants. And probably in the next few weeks, you will see how it will be easier. You will no longer be required, for example, to go to the CHR. AFPCLOAC is working, for example, on how to centralize all applications and work better with CHR, so that again, we are able to move as partners in this important task of providing human rights protection and promotion. It's also very gratifying to hear from the AFP Chief of Staff very important quote. He did mention during the signing of the MOU, we do our job guided by the three principles. We do our job following the rule of law. We do our job respecting human rights. And we do our job following strictly to the provisions of international humanitarian law. We will never go wrong as a public servant, as the protector of the people, and the defender of the territory if we are able to strictly adhere to the three imperatives that I have just mentioned. And there's no better way of saying that than what the AFP Chief of Staff said during that signing. And we echo that and we completely support his statement. And that, in essence, captures what is human rights in terms of the security sector. And I leave you with a quote that is very simple but captures it all. It says here, with great power comes great responsibility. All of us have watched Spider-Man. A very simple quote, but it carries a load of meaning. We have been vested with power as the Armed Forces of the Philippines. We do need power. The power vested in you is legitimate, but we implore you to use power wisely and properly in order to protect the people and in order to protect the state. And in the end, we are all we all become and we are all human rights defenders and all human rights advocates. Maraming salamat po, and it's been my pleasure to talk about the CHR's mandate.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Executive Director Jacqueline Ann Deguia. Now we will now proceed to the open forum to be moderated by the Director of the Armed Forces of the Philippines Center for Law of Armed Conflict, Brigadier General Joel Alejandro S. Naknak, Philippine Army. Sir?
Okay, magandang hapon po ulit sa ating lahat. Well, we will now proceed with the open forum, and I see some questions written on the Q&A. Some of it were answered already in the chat by Attorney Tom, but I would like to ask Attorney Tom to elucidate some more on the answers. Thank you.
Okay, General, do you want me to read the questions? I'll also, okay, as we go along. Um, there's this one question about, let me begin with, has the CHR, even the students advocates of HR, created the definition on enemy of the state? Um, I don't think we have a definition on the enemy of the state. There's also a related question here. Do you think that this will improve the relations of state actors and HR advocates? I think it will depend really on the substance of the definition. If this is in the context of armed conflict, enemy of the state, I think there is um, it will be a belligerent state in the sense of or an army, a member of the armed forces of the other state. Uh, but I think that one applies in the context of armed conflict. That's IHL, International Humanitarian Law. But I have yet to hear from a more recent definition in this regard. So if there will be a definition, I think it will depend on if it's progressive, if it will incorporate human rights principles and national security principles together. Um, I also answered a question here about um, do human rights principles and standards apply to the military as an organization in the strictest sense vis-a-vis military justice? I think this question is about the procedures before the court martial. Um, my answer here is I think it will really, I think 100% it applies. It applies. There's really no exception. When you think about it, the Article 14 of the Civil and Political Rights Convention, this one is about the right to fair trial in due process. It applies to all kinds of procedures. Ngayon, if the question is whether there's a violation, it will really depend on a case-by-case basis. We have to really look at the facts. But all the fair trial procedures due process apply. Okay, just a fun fact. When you look at the treaty, uh, there is an exception there for the military on freedom of association. The freedom of association of the military can actually be curtailed. So it can be limited. But other than that, there's nothing. Okay. Jurisdiction, there's a question here on the jurisdiction of the CHR. I think the executive director answered that earlier. Um, Edie, you might want to also expand your answer. Does it apply to citizens of the Philippines, all citizens of the Philippines?
Attorney Tom, I was multitasking. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what is the jurisdiction of CHR, all citizens of the Philippines? I said it applies to all citizens as well as to all
Yeah,
Filipinos residing abroad in
that's
certain
right.
cases. Okay. All right.
Sa
And
clarification,
then
Attorney
General
Tom, no?
Naknak, there's a last question.
Attorney Tom.
Yes.
Clarification, if you say Filipinos residing abroad, you're referring to citizen, not those Filipinos who were reverted to another citizenship.
We're not very let me answer that. We're not very strict in the interpretation of who a Filipino is. We're very liberal in our interpretation. In fact, anyone who needs help, anyone who comes to our office, we try as much as possible as a government office to cater to them. There's also been a lot of instances where other nationalities would go to our office, and I forgot to mention that if, for example, we have evaluated that a case is not within our primary jurisdiction but falls within the primary jurisdiction of agencies under the executive, but pertains to a human rights issue, we do refer that to those agencies. And we do recognize that it is also a form of access to remedies. And say, for example, one case is already pending um, under another government agency. What we do is also help them follow up so that there is also an additional recourse that we can provide many citizens. In fact, many do not know that most of our clients are ordinary people bringing to us ordinary concerns. But what has been sensationalized over the past few years are those serious human rights violations or those violations committed by state actors or non-state actors. But really, if you scrutinize our dockets, most especially during the previous administrations, it's mostly ordinary people, mostly those who have marital problems, victims of sexual abuse, those who have problems that can be solved by the lupong tagapamayapa and all that. So just to share to you how our ordinary day looks like.
There's a question here, Attorney. Any one of you can answer this. Does that mean that CHR head and commissioners can only be removed by impeachment? Referring to the appointment as commissioners.
Attorney Tom, can you answer?
That's actually a very good question. It will require constitutional interpretation. But when you check the Constitution, I think Article 11, Section 2, lists down the names of or the positions of those who are impeachable. And then it says, other offices shall be impeached as may be provided by law. So we have to look at the enumeration there.
So far, there's no case that has been done in that effect, right? No possible history.
I am not yet sure, General. It's not in my mind right now.
Okay.
There has been none. And as I mentioned a while ago, one of the characteristics, the more important characteristics that the CHR as a national human rights institution must reflect is independence. And it does not reflect well for the Philippine government if it were to impeach its human rights commissioners, because that will mean interference and that will seriously put into question our independence, and that will possibly downgrade the Philippine NHRI from status A to status B. And that again will not bode well during the Universal Periodic Review and during the examination of the government's compliance with international human rights treaties when it engages in the international community.
Okay. That was a very relevant question from Cavalier Colina, sir. There's anonymous question, anonymous source here. The question here is, Ma'am, meron na po bang nakasuhan na NPA as non-state actor ang CHR?
Marami kaming na-dismiss na kaso na sinampa laban sa mga AFP. Marami rin kaming mga sinasampang kaso against non-state actors. Kaya lang, dahil nga no permanent address, di ba? Unknown ang kanilang mga identities, then we are actually in a very difficult situation in identifying them. So yun yung short answer ko doon. So may mga sinasampang mga reklamo sa amin o kaya meron naman kami nakukuhang mga reklamo against the AFP. Marami doon na dismiss kung walang sapat na batayan. At the same time, kung meron naman silang paglabag, meron kaming finding of human rights violation. Kaya lang, in many instances, they are unidentified. And siguro it's also noteworthy to mention that under RA 9851, we are mandated to designate investigators to take the lead in IHL investigation, and probably this is one of the areas of cooperation which we can have with the AFP, so that we are able to enhance the capacity of our investigators. This is also where cooperation from the AFP is very much needed. In this regard, I also saw one question na sinabi na nagsampa na raw ang AFPCLOAC ng maraming kaso sa CHR. Ano nga ba yung nangyayari dito at kung ina-actionan namin ito? Yes, during the term of General Naknak, binahan niya kami ng maraming kaso. Lahat yan ay na-endorso namin sa lahat ng aming mga regional offices. I am happy to report to you that even before the AFP filed those complaints, I was looking at our reports, minomonitor na ito ng aming Child Rights Center, tapos iniimbestigahan na ng mga regional offices ang maraming kaso doon. Particular na yung mga grave human rights violations involving children. So, ibig sabihin, kahit na hindi namin binobroadcast, patuloy yung efforts namin talaga to investigate all of these cases. And gumagalaw sila. In fact, many of our regional offices are getting in touch with your people on the ground. Many are a little bit antsy or worry of us. That's why we articulated nga a while ago that CHR is a partner in the investigation of these cases which you referred to us. It's very important that we also provide to us critical information that will aid us in our impartial investigation. At the same time, if, for example, you find yourself on the other side of the fence, I assured you that our processes are very human rights-based approach. Our subpoenas are actually in recognition of your rights to due process. And again, cooperation is very important because we will afford you an opportunity to be heard.
Okay, that was well said, Attorney Jack. There's an interesting question here by Mr. Regimor Reyes. Can we use your A accreditation in the UN body in legally filing an international human rights violations of other foreign country in the West Philippine Sea issue, anchored on the UN and arbitral ruling in favor of the Philippines? This refers to your accreditation before the UN body. Accreditation. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the question calls for another question. What do you mean by filing? Okay. But let me just answer it this way po, siguro. The accreditation process for NHRIs, kasi the CHR is an NHRI. NHRI actually means National Human Rights Institution. So the accreditation process po is a global accreditation. It means that, for lack of a better term, binibigyan po ng grade yung mga CHR ng iba-ibang bansa. No? As you know, a CHR is supposed to be a watchdog. So we are like the ombudsman in that sense. Okay? So ngayon, I do not see how relevant po yung pagkakaroon ng accreditation ng status A, except pag sinabi po kasing status A accreditation ka, as an NHRI, meaning CHR of the Philippines, you have an access to different human rights bodies. Okay? Kung may mga conferences abroad po, you are able to share your thoughts and your opinions, and at the same time, you will be given a seat sa mga different relevant UN bodies. So therefore, I think kung meron pong human rights violation na nangyari in that context, we can definitely bring that out. Kung meron po na human rights violation in that context, we can definitely bring that out in those forums. So pagdating naman po sa filing, I'm not sure how it will help. So I think that's my answer po doon.
Another question from Cavalier Perfecto Ilicot Jr. This is about DOH. Has there been any case filed by CHR against DOH on the way it's handling COVID pandemic and its insistence in non-WHO drugs?
On the issue of COVID-19, in recognition that this basically is anchored on the right to health, we have chosen to exercise our advisory role rather than our protection role. And we have been steadily releasing advisories, position papers, as well as press statements, encouraging the government to employ a humanitarian approach and one that is anchored on the right to health rather than on peace and order. Despite many gaps and despite many challenges carried out by the government, we do have to realize also that there is such a thing as a progressive realization of rights. And a while ago nga, I was saying in one of my radio interviews that government is also trying its best to ensure that everyone is vaccinated. It would have been ideal if, for example, government is able to afford Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson. But according to this principle nga, to the best of our ability, according to what's available in terms of resources, then that's how they also are able to fulfill their human rights obligation. And so it happens right now that we have a multitude of vaccines, AstraZeneca, Sputnik, Sinovac. But at the end of the day, we join the government in rallying the public to be vaccinated because that is a noteworthy initiative. And we are rallying government to ensure that everyone is vaccinated, especially those who are weak and vulnerable. It's a very novel problem. We also realize how difficult the problem is. It's very new. Everyone was caught unawares, and they're trying their best. So hand in hand with the government, we're trying to also support all their initiatives. And in the process, if, for example, we have commented, it's only because you want to provide helpful feedback that will improve the delivery of services. That also is the function of feedback, and why the CHR speaks on many issues. It's not really to highlight the gaps of government, but more of to bring to the government's attention, as espoused in the Constitution, we want to make sure that the grievances of the people are also addressed. And using the perspective of international human rights law, we're able to encourage them to use that.
Okay, we would like to entertain the last two questions. Very short answers to this, Attorney Tom or Attorney Jack. What are your thoughts on the need to smoothen the highway or altogether construct a new one in the work of enhancing the exercise of human rights and their protection, which as of this date seems very rocky and full of thorny challenges. And the last question, is there still compensation for soldiers killed in an encounter with CTGs?
I'll answer the last one first. Very quick answer, yes, if it's a violation of IHL. Similar to Mama Sapano, we have granted financial assistance to victims thereof. So we have that in true recognition that your right has been violated and that the state recognizes it. And then the answer to the first, which Attorney Tom can add, for me, it's a communication problem. And we have to seize the narrative. For such a long time, many said that human rights is for the criminals only, which is not true. We are humans, we are not criminals, and we value human rights. And the CHR is anti-government or pro-leftist or pro-criminal, and we know better because we are partners at the end of the day. So I think it's a communication problem. We have to seize the narrative. We see that our everyday work is actually about human rights protection and promotion.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam. Do you have another additional answer, Attorney Tom?
Yes. General Naknak, before we go there, may quick rejoinder lang ako dun just to support the point of ED Jackie about the question on DOH. I think marami ho kasing misconceptions about the mandate of CHR. When you look at the Constitution or even the Supreme Court cases decided on the matter, kaya po sinabi ni ED Jackie that we actually took the road of advising government on COVID-19 matters is because we are not actually mandated to investigate violations of the right to health. We don't have the power to investigate economic, social, and cultural rights. The power of the CHR is to investigate violations of civil and political rights only. So just to clarify lang po, we don't have the power. And also, I think yung question about smoothening the highway, etc. I think that's a very good question because it shows that we can move forward and we can really work together. Ang gusto ko lang po sanang idagdag ay marami ho talaga kasing challenges and you have to understand din po, we have to understand each other that, you know, CHR po is a commission. We are not a court. So what do you mean by a commission? We investigate and then we refer to the court. We are not like the ombudsman po that we have fiscals and prosecutors. We try our best. I think ED Jackie is trying her best to investigate. Kasi ako po ay education. To investigate and then refer to and our protection director to refer. So I think we also have to educate the public about the limits of our mandate. But as I said, that question is good because it shows we can move forward, we can go along together, and then we are, sabi nga doon sa kanta, we are on a road to a better future. So
thank you. Yeah. So that's it. We give thanks to Attorney Tom Temprosa and Attorney Jacqueline Deguia for a very lovely and lively presentations and discussions. And also thank you to the Cavaliers who posted their questions online. So I turn over the microphone to our MC.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Brigadier General Naknak. And thank you very much to our speakers, distinguished speakers, Director Tom Temprosa of the Human Rights Education Promotion Office of CHR, as well as CHR Executive Director Jacqueline Ann Deguia. We learned so much from today's webinar. We were very enlightened. And however, there are questions still linger in our minds. So we hope that we could send an email to you. For those who want to ask questions, you could email our office or you could email CHR directly so that you will be clarified on certain matters, especially on the violations committed by non-state armed groups, particularly the communist terrorist groups. So at this juncture, we will now proceed with the awarding of the plaque of appreciation to our distinguished speakers. So we will first call on Attorney Tom Temprosa. May we request that the plaque be shown, our virtual plaque of appreciation be shown on screen. Okay, the Philippine Military Academy Alumni Association Incorporated, the PMA Foundation for Truth and Justice Incorporated, and the AFP Center for Law of Armed Conflict uh, presents this plaque of appreciation, and is awarded to Attorney Tom Temprosa, um, Director of the Human Rights Education and Promotion Office, CHR, for his enthusiastic participation as resource speaker in imparting his outlook on the human rights of the uniformed services in the Legal and Law of Armed Conflict webinar given virtually this 21st of May 2021 via Zoom webinar. Signed, Cavalier Ferdinand M. Bocobo, 74, Director of the PMA Foundation for Truth and Justice Incorporated. Cavalier Joel S. Naknak, batch 1990, Director of the AP Center for Law of Armed Conflict, and Cavalier Amado T. Espino Jr., 1972, Chairman of the Philippine Military Academy Alumni Association Incorporated. So maraming pong salamat, Atty. Tom Temprosa. Palakpak mo lang si Atty. Tom Temprosa.
Very much welcome po, and thank you for having me. Stay safe po to everyone, and God bless po. Thank you.
Sa ulitin po, ha. Now, moving on to the CHR Executive Director, Jacqueline Ann Deguia, we now present this virtual plaque of appreciation, and may I read this plaque of appreciation is awarded to Atty Jacqueline Ann Deguia, spokesperson CHR, for her enthusiastic participation as resource speaker in imparting her knowledge of the CHR and its current programs in the Legal and Law of Armed Conflict webinar given virtually this 21st of May 2021 by Zoom webinar. Signed, Cavalier Ferdinand M. Bocobo, 1974, Director PFTJI, Cavalier Joel S. Naknak, 1990, Director AFPCLOAC, and Cavalier Amado T. Espino Jr., 1972, Chairman, PMAAAI. Thank you very much, ma'am. Ito po, inaabot namin sa inyo. Lakpakan
Thank you
po
very
natin si
much.
Atty. Jacqueline Deguia. Now, at this point, ito po ang hinihintay din po natin. The closing remarks to be given by the Director of the PMA Foundation for Truth and Justice Incorporated. May we call on Lieutenant General Ferdinand M. Bocobo, Armed Forces of the Philippines, retired, to give his closing remarks. Sir.
Thank you, Colonel Esquivias. Good afternoon to everyone. In this room, I can see we are four lawyers here, so we understand each other. Myself, si Attorney Cavalier Naknak, and of course, our resource speakers. So I wish to take again and congratulate our resource speakers, Attorney Tom Temprosa and Attorney Jacqueline Ann Deguia, for that very wonderful, informative, and insights as partners of in the protection of human rights. I thank too for the 140 participants. Padami ng padami. We started 120, tapos naging 140. Who have attended this first of 3 series of webinar. And I would now advance my congratulations to the winners of the raffle after this. In closing, may I read this inspiring quote from Henry Ford. Anyone who stops learning is old, whether this happens at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps on learning not only remains young, but becomes constantly more valuable regardless of physical capacity. Henry Ford. So this is applicable for senior citizens like me. That's why we continue to learn, we continue to be young. And thank you for your time, and see you all again on June 8th.
Let's give a round of applause to our director of the PFTJI, Cavalier Ferdinand M. Bocobo, sir. So ito po yung part na marami pong naghihintay because we now will proceed now to the raffle eagerly awaited by the attendees for over today. So ito po ang ating virtual ruleta. So we will know who are the winners of 500 pesos cash, no? We will have 10 winners for our raffle today. So hindi ko lang po mabasa dahil maliit po. So Captain Derek Carbonell, maybe you can help us with this. Ay na, ay na, ay na. Oh, we have a non-alumni.
Physical presence, please. Magpakita lang, mag-sound off.
Yes, please sound off. Hesi
Na lang sir, raise na lang yung kamay sir. Kasi mag-raise na lang ng kamay dito sa attendees. Kasi bawal sila mag sir sa salita sa format na.
Okay, raise hand lang, raise
Wala.
hand. Okay, thank you.
Nandito ba siya? Kasi kung wala, mabi-wave.
Ano sir, going once, going twice. Ayan, may nagtaas ng kamay. Ayan sir.
Congratulations, Hesi Botanes. Now, let's go to our second winner. Maybe roll on the wheel. This is fun to watch. This is my first time to experience this. Oh, we have another non-alumni, Miss Joy Pagsiyat. So please raise your hand, Miss Joy Pagsiyat. You won 500 pesos for the raffle today.
Yan sir, present po siya.
Okay. Mag-ano sa going once sana eh. Okay, so for our third winner, please turn the wheel. Oh, Elizabeth Rosete of batch 2008. So,
Present siya sir, present.
oh, congratulations, Ma'am Rosete. Okay, so our next wheel natin, I lost count, pang-apat na to, pang-lima. So our fourth winner ito, no? Fourth winner o fifth. Non-alumni, Miss,
Na sir.
ano na yan? Panglima ito, no? Si Mr. Zosimo Gatdula. Congratulations, Mr. Gatdula, non-alumni. Nandito po ba siya?
Wala na po siya sa listahan ng ng attendees sir.
Oh, so I'm sorry, wave na yan. So we have to turn the wheel again to call on another winner. Please turn the wheel. Oh, we have the 62nd Infantry Battalion, the Unifier Battalion. Andito ba sila? Please raise your hand.
Wala na rin sir sa group sir.
Nako, sayang. So again, we turn the wheel. Up. Maria Queenie Palisok of 1997. Are you here, Queenie?
Andito sir, nandito siya sa attendees sir.
Oh, congratulations, Queenie. Swerte mo, ay mga nauna sa'yo, wala na. So again, let's turn the wheel. Congratulations, Queenie Palisok. Okay, please turn the wheel again. Oh, again, we have a non-alumni again, Miss Cynthia Serkinia. Miss Cynthia Serkinia, please raise your hand if you are here.
Yeah, present po siya sir. Nakita ko
Oh.
yung name niya.
Congratulations. Okay, so again, ikutin natin ang mahiwagang ruleta.
Pang 7th na ito sir, 7th.
Yes. We are now on our 7th winner. Sir Manuel Carranza Jr. Sir Manuel Carranza Jr. Batch 69. Sir, congratulations, sir. Sana, sir, dito pa kayo, sir.
Kaso sir, wala na sir.
Sayang. Okay. So,
How many ba? How many?
pang-pito na po to, sir. So, apat lang titira. So, Derek, pakiikot ulit yung ating ruleta. Okay. Emil Cruz, batch 92. Congratulations. Andito ka ba?
Negative sir, negative.
Ako, wala na rin. So, pakikot ulit ang ating ruleta. Major J. Completado, batch 55. Please raise your hand if you are here, Major J. Completado.
Present si sir.
Oh,
Andito
congratulations,
yung name niya,
sir. Congratulations, sir. Now, let's move to our 8th winner. Pakiikot ulit. May we call on Wilfredo Chavez, batch 92. Nandito po ba kayo, sir? Wilfredo Chavez.
Negative na po sir.
Oh, sayang. Pwede pa naman ipadala through GCash yung 500 pesos. Sige, ikot mo uli. Madali nila maklaim yung price through GCash. Madali ito. Oh, we have another non-alumni, Miss Maricel Paro. Are you still here, Miss Paro?
Andyan po siya sir. Andyan.
Oh, congratulations. Oh, yan na muna para maklaim mo through GCash. Okay, so please turn the wheel again. So our 9th winner. Oh, wow. OJ3 AFP 1990. Sino kaya
Present
si
po,
J3?
present po.
Congratulations sa J3. Ang swerte nyo, kayo yung pang-siyam. Congratulations. So now let's roll again for the 10th and last winner of 500 pesos in cash, which will be sent through GCash. May pag-asa pa kaya? So, Paul Carbajal, batch 2004. Are you still here, sir?
Present sir. Nakita ko yung name niya sir. Andito pa.
Congratulations, Sir Paul Carbajal. You can claim your prize through GCash. So, sir, that's about it. We congratulate all the 10 winners of the raffle, 500 pesos cash each. So now, at this point, may we ask everyone to stand up and let us now sing the PMA Alma Mater song. Thank you very much. So,
Good afternoon, everyone.
see you again on June
Thank
8
you.
on
See you
our
again.
sixth
Thank you.
seminar.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, sir. Maraming salamat
Thank
po,
you.
Director
Thank you. God
Ja,
bless.
Director
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank
Director
you. Thank you,
Jackie. Happy
sir.
weekend po.
Happy
Bye-bye.
weekend. Happy weekend. Bye.
Thank you.